You thought Ohio is a bad place? Well, now we're diving into West Virginia. Hello everyone and welcome back to our channel. I'm your host Emily and today we're counting down our list of the top 10 evil people from West Virginia you pray are never released. Coming in at number 10 is Gavin Smith. In December 2020, teen Gavin Smith ended the lives of his mother, stepfather, and two younger brothers. He was dating Rebecca Walker and their parents didn't approve of their relationship. Now the day of the crime, Rebecca was on a video chat call with Gavin, who was at his house. She said that he showed her a firearm and a knife over the video chat and she knew what he had planned. When Rebecca was asked if she encouraged Gavin to commit the crime, she said, "I was on the video chat with him. I didn't tell him, but I was texting him on the video chat. I told him to hurry up and do it." Now Gavin was found guilty of first-degree homicide on 3 counts and guilty of the lesser offense, second-degree homicide on 1. He was sentenced to 3 life sentences for the first-degree homicide convictions, 40 years in prison for a second-degree homicide, and 10 years for the use or imprisonment of a firearm during the commission of a felony. Now due to him being a teen at the time of the crime, he will automatically be eligible to see a parole board in 15 years. Number 9. Marybeth Davis. Marybeth Davis is a former nurse who was convicted of the deaths of her daughter and son in 1997. In September 1981 in Lewisburg, West Virginia, her son Seth had suffered massive damage to his brain, which prosecutors believed was caused by an injection of a large amount of insulin. He was later moved to a mental institution where he spent the rest of his life. Now several months after the incident with Seth, on March 11, 1982, her daughter Tegan died of a caffeine pill overdose. Dr. Ann Hooper, who performed the autopsy on the girl, found hundreds of capsules inside the digestive tract. In 1997, Marybeth was put on trial for the death of Tegan and injury to Seth. It was reported that prosecutors believed that she suffered from Munchausen syndrome by proxy. Marybeth received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, and Seth Davis then died on October 10, 2002 at the age of 21, and his death was recorded as a homicide. Now after signing a plea deal and giving a one-word confession in 2007, Marybeth was released from prison. Number 8. Shelia, Eddy, and Rachel Shoaf. Skylar Neese was a teenager who disappeared from her home in Star City, West Virginia around midnight on July 6, 2012. She was initially considered by law enforcement authorities to be a runaway, and an Amber Alert was not immediately issued in connection with her disappearance. Now the break in the case came when Rachel, Skylar's best friend, admitted to plotting with Shelia to end Skylar's life. Now the motivation Rachel gave for the death was they didn't like her and they didn't want to be friends with her anymore. David Neese stated that these two girls were among his daughter's best friends and that Shelia had even helped the family by distributing missing person flyers. Now after her confession, Rachel led investigators to Skylar's body. Skylar's body was found less than 30 miles away from her home. Rachel pleaded guilty to second-degree homicide on May 1, 2013 and was sentenced to 30 years in prison with eligibility for parole after 10 years. Shelia pleaded guilty to first-degree homicide on January 24, 2014 and was sentenced to life in prison with eligibility for parole after 15 years. Number 7. Jody Hunt. On December 1, 2014, Jody Hunt snapped and ended the lives of 4 people in West Virginia. He wrote a lengthy Facebook post about how broken-hearted he was just hours before the shootings. He said, "I am deeply hurt by the events that lead up to this day. I did not choose to have the love of my life go behind my back and sleep with several guys." He adds, "You will not hurt me anymore," and his rant goes on as he thanks Lisa's family. In conclusion, he begs for someone to take good care of his dogs. Jody, the owner of a towing company, ended the lives of his partner, his business rival, his ex-girlfriend, and the woman's new boyfriend. Jody was then found dead of a self-inflicted gunshot wound in his car along US Route 19. Now despite his death, West Virginia State Police Lieutenant Michael Bayless told the Associated Press that detectives had to sit down and piece all those puzzle pieces together and find out how all of this happened. Number 6. James Childers. On June 1, 2009, a packet containing letters and an audio tape confession from James Childers was delivered to the Clarksburg police station, most of which consisted of incoherent ramblings, but also had him admitting to committing 5 deaths and 4 arsons that had occurred in the last few years. He did not express remorse for what he had done and said that his misanthropic views were the motive, admitting an extensive resentment, paranoia, distrust, and anger directed towards everybody around him, including relatives. In the tape, James claimed that he had buried 4 of the victims on the family farm in Braxton County and another discarded in Barber County. A few hours after listening to the tapes, officers were dispatched to the locations, and to their horror, they found 2 skeletal female corpses. Shortly after these discoveries, police issued an arrest warrant for James, who was last seen at the Townhouse Motel in Clarksburg. The following day, numerous officers had surrounded the motel, but upon learning this, James shot himself in the head. After confirming his death, investigators, together with dog handlers, combed through the farm, where, according to James's testimony, there were at least 3 other people buried, but no further remains were found. Number 5. Bobby Joe Long. Bobby Joe Long would use newspaper ads to find vulnerable women, and if the women were alone when he arrived at their home, he would take advantage and rob them. He took advantage and ended the lives of at least 10 women, though prosecutors believed him to be connected to as many as 50 other crimes across the Tampa, Florida area. The first of his slayings happened in March 1984. The first body discovered by the police were the remains of Nguyen Thai Long, who had recently quit her job as an exotic dancer and planned to go back to school. Bobby lured her into his car by offering her a ride. He drove her to a back road where he took advantage of her and then strangled her to death. Now, one of his other victims, Lisa McVeigh, escaped, and it wasn't until she saw a forensic drawing of him on TV that she recognized him as her kidnapper. She relayed this information to the officer handling her case, and Bobby was arrested 12 days later. After a lengthy trial and multiple appeal attempts, Bobby was sentenced to death and executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison on May 23, 2019, and he had no final words. Number 4. Reta Mays. In June 2015, Reta Mays began working as a nursing assistant at the Lewis A. Johnson Veterans Medical Center in Clarksburg, West Virginia, with no certification or license to care for patients. She started to work overnight shifts on Ward 3A of the hospital's medical surgical unit, and elderly patients began suffering mysterious acute drops in their blood sugar level, which resulted in many deaths. Now, the hospital began an internal investigation of 11 deaths, and she was fired from the hospital in June 2018, and the investigation was turned over to the Inspector General for the United States Department of Veterans Affairs and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Now, the investigation into the deaths lasted over 2 years, and Reta remained free. She was questioned 3 times during the course of the investigation, and each time she denied any involvement in the deaths. Then in July 2020, she was then arrested and charged with the deaths of 8 individuals. The charges were later reduced to 7 second-degree homicides and 1 count of intent to commit homicide. On May 11, 2021, she was sentenced to 7 consecutive life sentences plus 20 years. Now, in addition to her sentence, she was ordered to pay $172,624.96 to the victims' families, the VA hospital, Medicare, and insurance companies. Number 3. Christa Pike. Christa Pike is the youngest female ever to be sentenced to death in the US when she was just 18 years old. Christa became jealous of her classmate, university student Colleen Slemmer, who she thought was trying to steal her boyfriend from her. Upon a meetup at a secluded location, Colleen was attacked by Christa while her friend acted as lookout. According to later court testimony, for the next 30 minutes, Colleen was taunted, beaten, and slashed, and a pentagram was carved into her chest. Christa then hit Colleen's skull with a large chunk of asphalt, ending her life. Now, Christa kept a piece of her skull and began to show off the piece of the skull around the school, and within 36 hours, the group was arrested. Now, soon after her arrest, Christa confessed to police, but insisted that they were merely trying to scare her, and it got out of control. Christa was charged with first-degree homicide and conspiracy to commit homicide. On March 22, 1996, after only a few hours of deliberation, she was found guilty on both counts. On March 30th, she was sentenced to death by electrocution for the death charge and 25 years in prison for the conspiracy charge. She is currently still waiting on death row. Number 2. Brandon Basham and Chadrick Fulks. Samantha Burns was last seen by her aunt at the Huntington Mall at 6:30 p.m. on the evening of November 11, 2002. At 9:45 p.m. that evening, Samantha used her cell phone to call her mother and said that she'd been visiting friends at Marshall University Courtyard Apartments but was coming home. Unfortunately, she never arrived home and has never been heard from since. In July 2005, Chadrick Fulks and Brendan Basham pled guilty to a federal charge of carjacking, resulting in death to avoid a possible death sentence. The pair had escaped from Hopkins County Jail in November 2002, and they have said that they carjacked Samantha shortly thereafter and ended her life, though her body has never been found. They are currently on death row for another homicide, that of Alice Donovan from South Carolina. And coming in at number 1 is Eugeine Blake. On January 16, 1967, Eugeine Blake attacked Donna Jean Ball, and she was able to live long enough to say what she experienced before she passed. Eugeine was then arrested arrested, eventually convicted, and sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Now, during his time in prison, he was described as a model inmate, so in 1976, Governor of West Virginia, Arch A. Moore Jr., commuted his sentence to life with parole for his good conduct while being incarcerated, and in February 1979, Eugeine was paroled. Then, in March 1982, he came across the car of Mark Withers and a girl whose name has not been disclosed. He went up to them and knocked on the window and started screaming. When Mark rolled down the window, Blake ended up shooting him and later threw his body over a fence, then took advantage of the girl and left. Then on October 26, 1984, the body of Marianne Hope Hembright was found in West Virginia. She had evidently been taken advantage of and strangled to death. In June 1985, Blake was indicted for the death and 2 counts of taking advantage of her. In 1997, he pleaded guilty on all charges and was sentenced to a 15 years to life term. Then in 2008, Blake was charged with Mark's death after his DNA was linked to the crime scene. He was soon extradited to Ohio, where prosecutors sought the death penalty against him for 3 counts of aggravated homicide. Now, in order to avoid a potential death sentence, he pleaded guilty to all charges in 2010 and was thus given a 20-year sentence with parole eligibility, stirring controversy among locals who wish that he remained incarcerated for the rest of his natural life. Well, that's all for our list of the top 10 evil people from West Virginia you pray are never released. Which person do you think is the worst? Let us know in the comments down below, and don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. I'm your host Emily, and we'll see you next time. Peace.